I'd like to welcome you all to this Medventions day. I'm Coherence, Vice President for Research and Innovation at Sunnybrook, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all. Sunnybrook has been fairly successful in commercializing in the products from biological laboratories and physical sciences laboratories, but there is a much bigger area, which is the clinical domain. And in order to take an advantage of the clinical practice and the commercial opportunities are there, a few years ago, Brian Courtney and Brad Strauss and Graham Wright had the idea of creating Medventions. With the generous support from Sunnybrook and Sunnybrook Foundation, this program has really flourished during the past few years. And the idea is to take the problems in the clinical domain and commercialize them. So create jobs and train the next generation innovators and help the healthcare in Canada and globally. Since 2016, there have been a total of 11 multidisciplinary teams that have been in training. And out of these, 8 have developed novel medical devices that are in the Sunnybrook labs now. And the first programs at Sunnybrook were Zurich Heart program that was really piloting this. And then Holland Point Joint and Medical Oncology have joined this program. And this is now expanding Sunnybrook-wide with where we received the Strategic Innovation Fund last year with $49 million, and Medventions becoming the training arm of that, and is expanding Canada-wide. And I'd like to especially thank the keynote speakers today. We have Tony Cruz, Chairman and CEO of Transition Therapeutics, Inc., and Andy Smith, President and CEO of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, and Deborah Duma, Vice President of Human Resources, Plateless Medical, Inc. And I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you.
So, Graham, I guess I'm up to bat. Good morning, everybody. My name's Andy Smith. I'm President and CEO at Sunnybrook, and I also would like to echo the warm welcome to you all for the 7th Medventions Day. I'd also like to underscore my congratulations and thanks for all the organizers, and starting with the vision of creating Medventions and the Medventions Day. So definitely let me echo that shout out to Brad and Graham and Brian and everybody that's been involved with not only the day today, but all of the work that goes out or into Medventions. And here you are in your 7th Medventions Day, and really having established a very important foothold in the calendar of yearly important events at Sunnybrook. So congratulations and thanks to you all. So I think that I want to start by, certainly for Sunnybrookers, but I'd like to also really underscore this to the world, if you will. What Medventions does and what it signifies really is very, very highly aligned and important with the strategy, and I believe the accountability of a academic health science center such as Sunnybrook. We have really a great blessing of resources that includes incredible people and incredible teams, and really have accomplished a lot, but there's so much more yet to happen, and I believe at a much accelerated rate in the years ahead. So Medventions, taking that notion that innovation and impact is what we expect of ourselves, both together with partners inside the hospital and partners, varied partners outside of the hospital. Really, that's what a Medvention signifies from where I sit in the CEO seat. Now, this is 2020. It's a year of great disruption. It's a year of the pandemic. It's a year where we've brought really important focus on issues of racism, issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And taken together, it's really been a very unusual year, understates it. And many people might say, well, my goodness, this is really a time for a pause. Can we really expect to be moving forward? My answer to that is absolutely yes. Indeed, I would say my read of the world and the world that we are expected to do good things and have impact in healthcare is that there's never been a better time. It feels in many of these important areas, including innovation, that change can happen at a more rapid rate and a more creative rate than ever before. And I think that Medventions and all of the attendees here today are part of that force that will make that happen. So it's uncertain times, but indeed change is possible, and I think change can and should be expected by us all at this time. So I wish you a great day today. I look forward to having the opportunity to say a few words later in the day. And this is important work. It is a changing world, and the group of people assembled here today really represent a significant force, if you will, that will make a better world for our patients, the patients and families that we serve, society that we serve, and importantly and unabashedly, for our economy here in Canada. We should embrace and expect that we will have an impact on that partnership between academic hospitals, universities, the private sector, commercialization sector, and government, as I'll talk about later on in the day. So these are changing times, and I believe these can be times that we look back and say that's when change really accelerated. So all the best. I look forward to the day, and have a great day, and I will see you later on in the schedule. So thanks very much, Graham, Brian, Brad, et al., and back to you.
Thank you, Andy and Clairvaux, for those warm welcoming remarks. And yes, we look forward to Andy's talk as our second keynote. I'm just going to set up for sharing the schedule. There we go. Hopefully you can see that now. But before I just get into an overview today, my name is Graham Wright. I'm the research director in the Schulich-Heart program and one of the co-founders of Medventions. But I want to take just a minute to acknowledge probably our what I'll say is our lead co-founder, Brad Strauss. He's stepping down. He has just stepped down about 2 weeks ago from the role as chief of the Schulich-Heart program. And so I want to take it as an opportunity to recognize his many contributions, particularly to building this program. He joined Sunnybrook almost 15 years ago as a clinician scientist and an innovator. He had already been developing collagenase for opening chronic total occlusions, and that's actually how we connected all those years ago. And he's still moving that forward. He patented it. He's taken it through early clinical trials, and he's continuing. He's developed a company around it to try and move all of that forward. So he was kind of our exemplar of a person who's going to drive innovation. And 10 years ago, he became chief, and he's really been the driver of building up innovation first of all in the heart program and then more broadly at Sunnybrook. And particularly, he was a really strong advocate for the recruitment of Brian Courtney, who is now the director of the program as a clinician innovator. Brian has a very long list of attributes of his own, having started multiple companies and now leading a 100+ person company up here. So, bringing him on, Brad recognized the importance of having a clinician innovator and understood the need to kind of break the mold of necessarily just looking at clinician scientists who publish papers and the like, to try and move things forward to translation and the like. So he brought him in, and Brad's also been effectively the principal fundraiser for this program. He's been untiring in his advocacy for the program and his encouragement of donors to support the program. He's been an advocate strongly at Sunnybrook in senior leadership in his role as chief of the program, and internationally establishing many links to various groups, and particularly Sheba in Israel now, where we're growing collaborations with, Sheba is one of the big drivers of innovation, medical device innovation in Israel, which, as we all know, is kind of seen as the startup nation. But beyond his administrative role, his fundraising role is exemplar. Again, I want to point out in this poster, here's Brad actually with one of the teams. And he's actually, I think, led probably more teams than anybody else, if not equal to Brian, in terms of these teams of fellows who come in and learn about a medical problem, identify issues, and then develop innovations in association with it. He's been an incredible mentor and guide to these groups. And in fact, he is moving forward with some innovations that have come out of that, particularly one device that he's built up there. So, you know, he basically covers all the bases. And on top of that, remains kind of a quiet person behind the scenes, just encouraging everybody to move it forward. So I just want to say that, you know, as he steps down from the chief role, he's been an incredible boost to getting us started, and but he's going to stick around, particularly in the innovation side. He's moving forward on one of the ideas with one of the teams. He's also working on a shield for patient exams to support efforts around COVID. So I see, hopefully with leaving some of his administrative duties, he'll actually get to spend more time in the fun that I think is one of his kind of driving motivators in innovation. So again, I just want to really thank Brad for all his contributions to this effort. So we'll maybe get to hear from Brad in a second when I turn over the moderation. But just let me just briefly go through the program. Just to kind of give you, again, this is the 7th Medventions Day. Kullervo highlighted already our 3 keynote speakers, Tony Cruz, Andy Smith, and Deborah Duma. The day kind of breaks down into 3 sessions. The first session is really a bunch of case studies, vignettes in efforts to scale up medical innovations, roles of clinicians, what happens after acquisition, how to kind of get past barriers. And since particularly the Strategic Innovation Fund focuses on image-guided therapy and big data and AI, we've got a particular focus now on efforts to kind of move forward the utilization of big data. And so that'll be kind of the first session. The second session is more about government strategy to accelerate innovation. We all recognize that particularly in the times of COVID, government has stepped in with significant investments to try and keep everything going and build for hopefully a brighter future in many different directions, taking an opportunity to kind of rejig things in a way that maybe sets us on a better trend going as we look forward to a future in innovation. And finally, the last section is more about kind of something near and dear to the Medventions heart, the training of the future entrepreneurs and clinician innovators. So we'll look at a couple of examples of efforts in that direction. I also want to really highlight, obviously symposia are, one of the reasons we go to symposia is to network. And we have created an opportunity for networking called Gather Town. So at all the breaks and lunches, you'll hear a little bit more about it at the beginning of the first break. But I've used this tool a couple of times now in Gather Town. It's a way of actually going and finding people and actually just sitting and chatting with them. And so hopefully it'll at least give you a bit of a flavor of what it would be like to be in person and connect. We'll also have special rooms for you to follow up with the speakers. So again, Ahmed will explain that more at the beginning of the first break. So without further ado, I hope you really enjoy the day. You get a lot out of it. You kind of make some connections. And I'm now going to pass it over to our fearless leader, Brad Strauss, to open the first session. Brad?
Okay.
I'll just unshare my screen, sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Graham, and for those very kind words. Thank you. The first session is entitled Scaling Up of Medical Innovations. Prior to speaking, I also want to give credit to Ahmed Nassef, who's just been untiring in his efforts to make this day possible. It's obviously a different type of meeting that we have today. And I think it's been extremely successful based on the registration we've seen and the schedule of speakers that we've been able to arrange. It is always a little bit unfortunate we can't see people face to face since that's such a big part of meetings, but I also grateful that they've tried to find some alternative ways to do it. So the first session, I think we should get started. Our first speaker and the keynote speaker of this session is Tony Cruz, and I've known Tony Cruz for many years. He's been a great mentor of mine over the years. He's taught me a lot. He's an incredibly successful and talented individual. He is currently the CEO of Transition Therapeutics, Inc., a subsidiary of Optical Health. Tony was the founder, chairman, and CEO of Transition Therapeutics, which was an extremely important company in Canada one of the first of its kind. It's was NASDAQ and TSX publicly traded until it was acquired by Optical in 2016. Had a very broad, diverse range of products that they had, particularly in Alzheimer's and diabetes. Before that, Tony was a co-founder of Angiotech, which is also a very famous Canadian company that was very involved with Taxol-coated stent that was partnered with Boston Scientific. And prior to that, Tony was an extremely successful academic where he worked at, he was senior scientist at Mount Sinai Hospital and professor in laboratory medicine at the University of Toronto until 2008. He was the founder and the director and CEO of the Canadian Arthritis Network, CAN, a Center of Excellence in Canada. So Tony is extremely talented, brings a lot to the table, and the title of his talk will be Scaling Up of Medical Innovations, My Personal Experiences and Lessons. And I'm particularly interested in hearing about it because I think he really has had a very inspiring career. So Tony, if you can lead off with your talk. Thank you very much for doing this as well. Let's see.
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. Hi, Brett. Sorry, Tony is having issues connecting to Zoom. I'm just helping him out.
Okay. Talk amongst yourselves then.
Apologize for that.
Zoom amongst yourselves for a few minutes. Do you want me to give more introduction?
Maybe while we're waiting, just to let people know that if you have questions, there is a Q&A box. I see a couple of people have started to highlight a couple of questions. So, but if you have questions for the speakers, if you go to the Q&A box, you can kind of load them up as you come up with them, and then Brad will work through them after each speaker.
Yeah, the plan is to have the speakers present and then have a discussion at the end of it rather than at the end of each talk. So I think that would be the plan.
Great.
Trying to collect through them. Yeah. Okay. Ahmed, do you want us to start with someone else first? Would that make it easier?
Yes. Yeah. Well, Tony is now on.
Okay. I'm now on. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
No okay.
Press Tony.
I don't see your picture yet, Tony. But
for some reason it's locking up. I apologize. I sent Ahmed my slides in case I can do it with the talk and the slides, maybe, or.
Ahmed, do you want to share screen from your end and then put the slides up?
Sure. I'm just looking for the presentation. Can you send it again, Tony?
I can't. Right. I will do it right now. Okay. Even the computer is locked up here. I
got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't expect this because I use it all the time. Do you have it or?
Yep, it's up now. Perfect.
Okay, so I'll just ask you to change the slides. Is that okay, Ahmed? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds great. Well, first of all, I apologize for the delay, but thank you for the introduction, Brad. You're right, I've known you for a long time and I've enjoyed the association with you for all those years. It's been great. First of all, good morning and thank you for attending the presentation. I like to thank the organizers for inviting me. When I was asked to give a talk on scaling up medtech innovations and with a particular focus on addressing some of the barriers to capitalize on opportunities, I tried to look back and see where could I have done better over the last 20 odd years or almost 30 years. And it really came down to one thing, and that is what we start with in a technology. And if we, do the right diligence, or if we're aware of what we need to have and the things that we need to show, whether it's to pharmaceutical companies or device companies or investors, then I think we're much better positioned to attract the funding that we need to carry out and develop technology. And so I've gone back to try and see what are the things that sometimes we do, sometimes the things that we don't always do properly or diligently enough to make sure that we don't meet all these hurdles once we get going. So can you turn to the next slide, please, Anna? Thank you. Okay. There are some assumptions that we take that sometimes are just not accurate. And in our eagerness to start something and think we have a great idea, we do make some mistakes, or at least I have in the past. And that is the assumption that we have a great idea and we can make it work. And the whole idea is to have an idea that way you don't have to work very hard to make it work. And so the best way to do that is obviously to do very strong diligence initially and make sure that it meets all the needs or criteria that later on you're going to be working on to put in front of investors and also pharmaceutical companies or potential partnerships. Also, there's an understanding that when you have limited resources, the founder understands drug development, IP, clinical development, business, and that's not always the case, at least not well enough to really be able to guide or lead the development in that side. So it's important that that's known right from the beginning so that you can then have access to these things. The technology in the company is worth much more. I've made a lot of mistakes there where, you reach a certain milestone, people come to you to offer you money, and you think, oh, that's too low a valuation, I won't take it. But one thing to understand, I think, that I probably didn't understand at that time, was that money brings money, and you want your investors to make money so that, in fact, there will be others that will come and invest at a time, and it really does build up momentum in a company to go. So sometimes taking money at a lower valuation than you expect, as long as you think you can raise the valuation more with those funds, I think it's worth taking. Very hard should resist money. The management that you start with, you often think you can take it all the way, or at least you grow into those positions that you take on, even though you're not experienced enough at the time. It's okay, but I think you need to bring in the right expertise right from the beginning as well. And one thing you don't control is when you can raise money or go public. You meet milestones, but you often, I think, you hit hurdles. For example, the markets aren't funding anything at those times, or there's no IPOs, or pharmaceutical industry changes direction. So you hit roadblocks that can prevent growth. And it's the kind of business that there's tremendous potential, but also there's tremendous risk. Next slide. This slide basically, we all know what's involved, and it's very easy, and you do it over and over again, and you think you get better at it. But actually, it's not that simple, and there's a reason why there aren't more successes and why there's a lot of failures in this business. And I think, at least when I look at it, is the ones that I thought that were more successful were things that were obvious that they could be successful. So not all ideas are very good or very doable, and therefore I think you have to really do diligence and understand where it fits in the marketplace. The second thing is it takes a long time for success, and when you take 5-10 years to develop something that's of real value, and obviously it has to have sufficient value to have ongoing funding to carry it out, a lot of things can go wrong. For example, I've had cases where everything's going fantastically, tremendous valuation, and then you have a cohort of patients that you have an imbalance in deaths or something like that has nothing to do with the drug, but could kill the program. Or you have a technology that you partner, you have a great partnership, and then all of a sudden the company has an internal situation of some kind that changes direction and really almost kills the program, or sometimes kills the program, and you don't have any control over that. So I think you have to be prepared for all those things. It's a complex business, and things do happen when you have to wait that long a time to develop a product. It's, you need a broad range of expertise, as I mentioned before, and that's critical, because if you don't have the expertise at the table that understand the different functions that are required to carry out development, and also to carry out also partnerships, if you have those partnerships, it really does hinder the technology. It requires large amounts of investment, and when you're talking about that means preparation 6-12 months in advance to make sure that when you reach a milestone, you actually can attract all those people that you've talked to for the past year. If you don't prepare in advance, it's not going to happen. You depend on markets, liquidity, because you don't control those. And as I mentioned, it's extremely risky, and therefore anything you have to, prepare always in advance to diversify somewhat without diluting the idea that you're working on, or the idea to your investors that things aren't working and that's why you're changing your mind. So again, it comes down to a really good idea and its innovation. Next slide. So I'd like to focus a little bit on innovation, because I do feel that's the core that you're working with for 5-10 years. And the better the idea you have, the better innovation you have, the higher likelihood of success. So it's a successful exploitation of a new idea. And so you better understand what are the stages that lead from invention all the way to commercialization. And you have to have a plan that incorporates things right at the beginning, no matter how early your technology is. I think that's critical. Next slide. There are 3 stages of innovation. You could divide this further, but simplified. One is the invention portion. Then there's the translation and development, taking that idea and taking it further in development and validating it in humans. And then there's commercialization. But you really do have to have a plan that analyzes and is critical about determining whether this product or idea has a high likelihood of success at the end. If you don't do that beforehand, it's going to run into difficulty. And secondly, you're not going to convince people that you know exactly where you're going and what the value is of your technology. Next slide. So invention, for example, is at least the way I see it, there's 2 areas that I think I've been successful at. One is to have, for example, a novel idea, well-understood mechanism of action that can affect disease, and then you get a tool that can actually affect that mechanism, and therefore it's obvious, and that's well understood by partners, potential partners like pharmaceutical industry or investors, and you have an advantage. It's either oral versus injectable. So there's an easy understanding to move that forward. The second type that I think have been successful is taking a molecule that you know works. Now it's finding an area where it will work better or add benefits. And so that has also worked very well. So it provides significant improvement, but it's an existing idea, whether it's taking, say, a molecule that works once daily and converting it to once weekly. I think those are very good technologies to try and develop forward, at least something that's simple. Obviously, supportive scientific excellence, inventors that bring credibility are perfect in terms of raising money, but also talking to pharmaceutical industry to establish some sort of partnership. These things are obvious: patent position. You don't want any technology to have that is encumbered with royalties or milestones, because eventually that will that will decrease your valuation in the future and may cause problems eventually in terms of partnerships that you work down the line. And I think if you're going to go out there and raise money, you have to be able to understand your technology really well from beginning to end, and it's easy to understand and easy to explain to a person who may be, in lay language. I think that's really important, and how it's positioned is critical. Next slide, which is translation. Again, just going through this, you want a technology that, like I said, it's easy to understand and where it fits in some disease indication. It's great if you can pick an indication where there are animal models that can predict efficacy for that indication and toxicity, so that it's established. It's easy for potential partners to look at the data and immediately understand that it has a good likelihood of success, or even investors who today, most funds have their own MD, PhDs, whereas when I first started, it was a lot easier then because there were fewer, it was more business. Now there's a lot more knowledge that you have to have when you show up for funding. The other thing to really is to select a technology that has large therapeutic windows, because as you go along, animals aren't the same as humans, and therefore you're going to have to be flexible in what doses you can give. The bigger your therapeutic window, the better chance you have of adjusting in humans to optimize the efficacy and reduce any potential adverse event profiles. Acceptable toxicities and pathologies. Obviously, you don't want to have any major toxicities, or that will be the thing that could eventually derail development. Pharmacokinetic profile, pharmacodynamic profiles. They sound like, it's pharmacology, it's not that important, but actually that's how a lot of data is presented to the FDA, and you need to, I think, really understand that your drug and your exposure of your drug and the response of your drug occurs at doses that are absolutely appropriate and safe. Oh, for some reason it's coming on now. No, maybe not. Oh, okay. So the next slide. Sorry. Okay. Oh, now it's on. Okay. The next slide is, understanding commercialization. The market opportunity is very important because it determines really what the market is, but also the costs of going into that market. If you're going into diabetes, you have big costs, and therefore you're going to have a lot of potential, a lot fewer partners, and a lot more difficulty in developing the technology and the costs of the technology. So you really have to pick your indications carefully today. For example, orphan indications are very popular because you use small numbers of trials, lower costs, and yet you get a good, the cost of goods could be a bit higher because you often charge more for orphan indications. So again, you have to really pick your indication today a lot more than you did previously, I think, in the past. The market penetration today, there's real competition out there for every single product. So you have to show how your product benefits over existing products and products in development, because if something comes on board in the market that you're developing, it does move forward. It could kill your program very quickly. Also meeting payers' expectations. I would say there was a time where you could be first, second, or third to market and continue development and get funding for it. Today, if you're first or second, you're okay. If you're third, you're going to get a lot fewer people who want to invest in you and companies, and it's a lot harder to get partnerships unless you have a real benefit that you can show and clearly show that it will occur in humans. Next slide. There are other things that obviously affect or innovation or drive innovation. Whenever there's new breakthroughs, whether it's gene therapy or new indications that now are becoming obviously more noted, but those can drive innovation. There's also others, which is society demands, like lifestyle drugs or associated with aging or different approaches that people are using. The market can also be pulled, like COVID, for example, with all the amount of money that goes into it, with any idea that may have potential major indications where there's an increasing medical need, like Alzheimer's. Obviously, cancer and orphan drugs are ones that are particularly well-funded at the moment because there's a real need for both of those, because orphan drugs have not been well addressed, or orphan indications. So I think these are things that I think if you're starting a company, you really have to taken into consideration now, whereas when, perhaps I did it a long time ago, I wasn't thinking of all these things. I think today you have to, because they're going to have an implication on development. Next slide. Next slide. Is there a next slide or, sorry? Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is just, I think one of the key ideas that I wanted to bring out was that what you start with is really very important, because, and you'll know very clearly as soon as you go and meet investors or pharmaceutical companies, you'll know very well whether you have something that's going to be of interest to them. And if you go out there and you don't think there's interest, and they explain to you why, I think it's important to come back and understand that you may have difficulty down the line, and that will create, it'll be an impediment or a barrier to capitalize the company and get to a successful development, or lead to a successful development. Obviously, this slide shows the biotech business model, which is, fairly straightforward. You have innovation, lead molecule, preclinical, phase 1, 2, 3, and eventually, hopefully, approval. As you go along, there's more and more costs. So you need better and better data, but you also need, during this period, to make decisions very rigorously about whether you're going to partner the technology, advance the technology, use these milestones to raise funds. And if you see at this stage that things aren't working out the way you plan, or you see hurdles that could potentially hinder the development of the technology, consider partnering it or selling it, just because at least you'll get some return at that point, and you won't disappoint investors later on. So I think these are key milestones that you really have to examine and look at what is needed to, how are you going to progress the technology or change direction at this time. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry. Next slide. Hello.
So Tony, we're currently on a slide that shows Angiotech Pharma on the left, and then is describing what happened at Angiotech.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. Let's go back.
I think you're not. It's not showing up in yours.
Yeah, it's not showing up. Okay, sorry about that.
Maybe you should go back a few, Amit.
Yeah, let's go to the funding one. Do you have the funding one?
Yeah. Funding innovation.
Yeah, I think that this is an important one, just because I think, obviously, if you can't get funded, you're not going to advance technology, because today you need a lot of funds to do this. When we started our companies, we always started with angel investors, and the idea here is that angel investors will believe you, and I think will fund you. And some of these angel investors are like institutions. They have enough money that they behave like institutions, so if they like what you do, they can actually carry you along quite far. In fact, with Angiotech, angel investors were the major funders for the company for a long time, along with a couple of VCs. So there is advantages to those angel investors to get going, and they can stay with you for a long time. Venture capitalists, obviously there's some advantages there in the sense that they have more funds, they have some connections, some expertise, but they also want to say in your company, and that can be sometimes lead to some discussion about what direction to go, which may not be a good way to go. I have not had that much experience, with the exception of Angiotech, with venture capital, just because I didn't go that route to stay private for a long time. I went more the route of the public markets, and the reason being that if you think you can go out there and sell your story, the public markets is a great way to go to raise money. There's some costs to it, but the investor today still likes to have liquidity, and if you go to the public markets, the chances of you getting investors is easier. But on the other hand, you have to be prepared to go out there and sell your story in an ongoing, at least 50% of your time, so that you're selling the story, and at some point those investors will come in and support the company. In all the technologies I've had, I've partnered, and it's, I think, still the best way to raise money. I think I've raised really hundreds of millions of dollars to fund some of these programs, and I think they've gotten their return. A lot of things failed, but the ones that succeeded have revenues that really support all the failures. So, and it's a very good, if something's going to cost $300 million to develop, like an Alzheimer's technology or diabetes or even a growth hormone that we're developing here at Optical, it really does need strong, big pockets to be able to do that. And so definitely a good way to go is a partnership. The only problem is you do lose control of it, and therefore you have to really maintain a great relationship to ensure that things move forward. Next slide. The next slide is I think whenever you're looking at a technology or you're looking at a company, you have to always have in the back of your mind, not the back of your mind, at the forefront of your mind, that you're trying to create value for shareholders. And that is the best way to attract funding. So you have to really have a good understanding of value creation steps so that you can highlight those to investors and they can see where they're going to see an increase in their valuation, and then match those with capital raises so they make money and you raise money for your company. I always keep in mind exit strategies as I go along, just because you have to be able to do this, or else you're going to miss opportunities as they exist. And secondly, you can't advance something that is not going to work for a long time. You can adjust, but it's not always easy and it's not always worth it. Next slide. This slide here is just showing some companies that I founded, and the first two went public. Angiotech with Taxol-coated stents. We were private for 10 years, and then we did an IPO when that became successful with Taxol-coated stents. Transition Therapeutics, we did Alzheimer's, diabetes. We went public very soon after we started the company, or within a year and a half we started the company. And again, I'll have good sound technologies to go forward. Now, private companies that I started, I saw that there was a good opportunity, but it's not something I wanted to spend the time and develop, or I didn't think there was the upside to even take public. I quickly sold them. And one was a diagnostic company for collagen fragments where we did clinical trials. We used it for clinical trials in osteoarthritis. Oncotherapeutics, which is biomarkers predictive for severity outcomes of specific cancers. AIM Therapeutics failed. It didn't have activity. And Neuromedics was a brain inflammatory for a drug for Alzheimer's, and we sold that as well. So again, I think what I would advise is really having an open mind for exit strategies so that you don't lose money in your shareholders. And secondly, you put in deeper pockets that can take the time to address issues associated with those technologies. Next slide. Very quickly. I know I'm delaying a bit. The Angiotech Pharmaceuticals was a success. We had Taxol, which was at that time the leading cancer drug, the first cancer drug to reach $1 billion in sales for Bristol Myers Squibb. We patent indications outside of cancer for inflammatory diseases. And so we went into MS, arthritis, psoriasis, and we tested and we took it clinically. We also thought that it was effective for maybe local application where we reduce the adverse event profile, the systemic effects or toxicities of Taxol. And so we put in coronary stents, we put in pancreatic stents, and we had some animal data. And basically, with that animal data, we partnered to Boston Scientific and Cook, and then they took it and developed it into a drug, into Taxol-coated stents. Pancreatic stents, we actually did not have sufficient efficacy to take it forward. So, next slide. So we basically, at the time, you know, we put in all these different indications. The only place it worked was, in fact, in the drug-coated stents. Everywhere else, there were some toxicities that prevented it. So based on the Taxol-coated stents, which was a huge market at the time, we went public at there. And in terms of funding of this company, it was all angel investors, high net worth individuals, and 2 VCs that took us all the way to when it became successful in terms of having a product with our partner, Boston Scientific. The funding for the company came, again, as I mentioned, from shareholders that were high net worth individuals in VC and a couple of VCs. But that company reached a market cap of $2 billion, and Boston Scientific had approximately $2.8 billion per year in sales with this product. So again, it was the idea of being opportunistic with a drug that really worked. It was finding an indication where it could work in a slightly different indication than cancer. So again, I think being opportunistic is really important in this business, and you have to obviously seek those. Next slide. The next slide just shows basically what, it starts with the scientific idea or the technology, and then you build up on that. And if you have a good core foundation of the technology, and you should know that fairly soon when you go out to raise money, whether it attracts attention or attracts investors, then it makes this process occur much easier. And then you just have to, I think, be careful in terms of when to raise cash so that it's not as dilutive. Secondly, making sure that you're attracting the right investors, because that's all part of the value creation that you do. And the last slide, because I know I'm running a little late, a couple of minutes late. Last slide is just where we are today relative to before, really. And at the end of the day, I think there's more need today than ever before for new products. There's such competition. So if you have something that's valuable, you should be able to get a partnership, or should be able to raise money for it, because there's a lot of people searching for technology. I think you just have to be very opportunistic, goal-oriented, and you really have to pay attention to what the market need is and the benefits of whatever you're developing to ensure that not only currently there's a marketplace for it, but eventually 5-10 years down the line that it will be needed. So the good thing is that there's a lot of money out there to fund these opportunities. You just have to really start with the right opportunities and with the right plan that visualizes it from the beginning of the invention all the way to a successful product. And the more you do that, I think the higher the likelihood of success. So I'll just leave it here. Brad?
Tony, thank you very much. A great introduction to the session. Please don't go away, because there's some questions, and I think we're going to leave the questions till we finish all the speakers and go ahead with the second speaker. But thank you very much, Tony. Our next speaker is Dr. Ed Harvey. Dr. Harvey is professor of surgery at McGill University, and he's chair of the board, co-founder and chief medical officer of MYO1 Inc. He's going to be speaking on addressing barriers to capitalize on opportunities. Just a few words about Dr. Harvey. He's a professor of surgery at McGill University. That's where he obtained his medical degree. He's been interested throughout his career in fundamental and clinical aspects of bone healing. And there's a large range, everything from stem cells, how outcome evaluation, implants, fracture optimization. And he's the founder of 4 companies, and he's worked with a number of other startups as well. In addition to this, he has a very active academic life. He's editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Surgery and the editorial board of several orthopedic journals. Obviously a powerhouse, and we're very grateful that you are going to speak with us today on addressing the barriers to scaling up medical innovations. Thank you very much, Dr. Harvey.
No problem. You guys hear me? You can see my slides?
Yeah, we see fine.
Okay, great. So I'm talking today. Thanks a lot for the invitation and the kind of esteemed group that I'm in. I'm happy to be here as a rare surgeon who's in this field. I'm charged today with addressing barriers. You can see from my degrees, I don't have an MBA. I don't have a chartered accountant degree. Most of what I've learned is by hard knocks or by reading. My disclosures, I just want to mention I have no financial interest in anything I mention except for the companies that I'm involved with. So the objectives today, I was supposed to talk about getting a device or idea to market, and these 5 goals that are not discrete. They actually all happen at once. They're sort of like changing a tire while you're going down the highway. You have to get all these done at the same time in order to actually scale a company. And the proviso is this is just my opinion. Other people have different takes on this. So what have I scaled? Personally, nothing. I think it's a team game. I've been very fortunate to keep my day job or my other day job as a trauma surgeon, and but still be involved in the innovation space. I think the one company that's really scaling the most right now of our 3 is Myo1, although we have 3 companies that are actively scaling and a couple other startups underway. So in order to scale, you really have to have already nailed the technology, protect the IP, understand innovation software, copyrights, have a design freeze, and been through regulatory. Scaling is really about the business part, and that's not really what physicians do well. So I'm going to talk about my experience with that. There's no real cookie cutter answer. I mean, I think the hard thing about hard things is it's hard, and that's what Ben Horowitz said. There's no real formula for dealing with a lot of the problems you're going to come through as in the valleys of death as you come towards scaling. It's just something you're going to have to deal with. And scaling is different for every approach. There's, depending whether you're a grouper or a lumper or a splitter, there's 10 different types of innovation or 3 different types of innovation. And every type of innovation has a different scaling approach. Fortunately for biomedical, most of the innovation is in the product performance kind of category. You've invited a new robot, gamma knife, you have a new implant you want to design and bring to market. But the unfortunate part about that is it's also the easiest innovation step to copy. People recognize lucrative markets. If you think you're in an empty niche, you're probably not. And there's really a race to parity in lucrative markets. That makes scaling harder. If you've got competition in your niche, you have to scale faster and you need more money. How do you do that? Well, there's several valleys of death in innovation. I think the big thing that people recognize is that you have to assemble the right team to attack the problem. And you want to get down this ladder towards monetization, where you get your product out and you capitalize and you popularize it and you have some kind of end strategy fulfillment. But that team that you had to innovate and bring technology to light might not be the right team to scale. And it's a hard thing to realize. And I think it's the most important thing in the scaling process is you have to recognize that your expertise needs change a little bit. And there's tons of books and hundreds of books been written about it. I've read a few of them. It doesn't make me an expert, but I'm just going to talk about it. So you've started probably, if you're in the audience here, with an R&D firm, with either in the biotech or the biomedical field, with lots of engineers and creators, and you've brought this idea along, and now you're scaling. But scaling means those people might not be the right people on the bus. So what do you do with those people? You have a lot of really talented engineers and creative people that you've become friends with. They're part of the family, and you need to either fire them or use them, because it's just a hard fact of scaling. And we've chosen at our firms is that we're going to spin them out into new tech. So we have and we have another startup waiting for our creative team. But a lot of firms haven't got that ability, and they have to let them go, and they go out and they start their own firms. So it's a hard decision to make in scaling, but something you've got to realize, because you're spending, when you're scaling, is very different. You're hiring accountants and salespeople and software people and e-commerce people, and not engineers and people that are building things for you. And the team must change. The boards, I just want to short talk about boards, is that you need a scientific board. Everyone recognizes that. That's where a lot of your KOLs come from. But you're also your board and your executive board, and their job is really to protect value for your company. And they're going to have different demands on you than a scientific board would. And you have to deal with that while you're scaling. They can be a great resource for you to get funding, but they also are going to put demands on you. The truth of the matter is, if you don't have any capital, you don't have a company. How do you build capital? I think Tony's gave a great talk on it just the last talk. But if you have the right product, if you have the right plan, and you can identify the right market and price fit, and one of my favorite books about this model is Jeffrey Moore of Crossing the Chasm. In other words, you can find a niche that you can own, then you can get capital. My favorite source of capital for our firms has been non-diluting sources, starting with government grants and nonprofit sources. We've been very successful in finding millions of dollars in funding that doesn't dilute your company. It doesn't distract you from what you're doing. The next favorite is friends and family. We've been very fortunate to fund a lot of our business ideas with people in our milieu. You need to find the special kind of persons willing to invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and not ask you about it every 3 months because they're not getting it back unless you sell out. We've used a convertible note mode to do this, and even with our VC partners. And if they don't like convertible notes, we just haven't taken the investment. Strategic partners are probably the best way to go. And this is a partner that you will take money from, sell them part of the company, but they will eventually help you in your marketing. So if you're building an electronic widget, and we do sensors, mostly our companies, getting a partner like Samsung that would give you several $million for a chunk of your company and also ensure you that you have a marketplace at the end is a great way to build your company. And my fourth favorite is venture capitalists, and they will take a percentage of your capital and percentage of your company and help you with money, but you are diluting from day one. And we try to, in our companies, delay that process. So monetization, how do you get those people to be really interested, and how do you drive it up this hockey stick of monetization? Your only goal should be to produce a needed product. If you have a needed product, you have value, and it attracts money. And you need twice as much or 3 times the amount of money that you think you do, and twice as much time usually. So you should factor that in when you're going along. The other problem with biomedical startups and getting money is that there's a lot of help and hinder factors in the healthcare ecosystem. It's not just a typical, I'm building a left nose warmer and I'm going to market it to the general population of the world. You're in a different kind of playing field with the healthcare ecosystem. There's several different players. You have HMOs, private hospitals, public hospitals, clinics, private people, and others that are paying for your product. And you have to have sort of a different approach for most of those. You have to navigate the policy and regulations that pervade the system. And 510K FDA approval is what people talk about a lot. But if you're going to market, we've been through CE Mark, Health Canada, and FDA approvals, and there's different nuances for each one, and you have to really be able to concentrate to get through them. People don't realize that it takes a lot of money to get through regulatory. I think the average amount of money outlaid for a type 2 medical device to get through the end of regulatory at FDA is $33 million. And if you're doing a type 3 device, it's closer to 100 million. And I think Tony Cruz just illustrated how expensive it was to get a drug through the market. It's even worse. Your customers are increasingly engaged consumers. So you can't just throw out a product, say it's a great product, and expect that to be bought. There's a lot of accountability, the vigilant consumers and Dr. Google, and there's a lot of cost pressured payers, not just the hospitals, but also investment partners. And medicine in general is a conservative mindset. They don't like change, physicians and hospitals. Things that worked are good. We can't just go along and change it. So in order to define your valued company for monetization, you have to be able to communicate to all these different players and be able to tell them how you can bring value to their part of the pie. So building capital, I think people underestimate the time you have to spend on raising money. I think your C-suite and executive teams are where this happens, but startups are hard to win unless you have a CEO or somebody whose full-time job is raising and they're tracking the money, then you're going to be in trouble. So as a physician or an established researcher, it's extremely hard to keep that day job full time and still be able to build your company. Like I said, you need $100 million to bring some of these devices to market. You can't do that working 3 hours a week, even a day. So part of that capital is building the right people and bringing the right people on the bus. Somebody later today, I think, is going to talk about hiring policies, but I just want to say that during scaling, you're not going to be hiring people that look like you. You're going to be hiring more specialists than generalists. There's several places to get them, and I think that's going to be covered this afternoon. Part of capitalization and scaling is that your pitch deck now becomes a different pitch deck. It's a scaling deck. So part of the lexicons that you have to become familiar with, and part of the vocabulary, is that you're going to be talking about monthly holdings, monthly burns, yearly burns, predictions for value, quarterly reports. It's hard for a physician or researcher to do that, and you're going to have to transition your team. This is just an example from Salesforce that we are using Salesforce for part of our predictions. And it's a great way to give infographics to your lab, to your board, and to potential investors. There are other products that are just as good. Defining goals, another important part. You're going to give structure to your scaling deck. I think that you really, even though people have what normally in their pitch deck, that little timeline on the bottom there, that's a good for your pitch deck. But when you have a scaling deck, you need to have real numbers. So you need to have that person, like a chief financial officer or a controller, that has those different skill sets, are able to portray that timeline in a financial timeline. Part of defining goals is branding. People say, oh, that's social media, it's not important. But one of my favorite chapters in this book is chapter 7, and it really sits you down and tells you how to brand. And I think that this is the notes I took from Myo 1, which we actually used for our website and for our corporate message, but it steps you through these thought processes that make you differentiate your company from other companies. And that's what's important. It separates you from the chaff. I think that a lot of the stuff we came out with at the end of this didn't sound like our company, but is our company. And that's what's important. You have to rethink the way you define your company. If you can define your goals appropriately, then you'll understand what infrastructure you need. Infrastructure is very limited by budget. And so what you use and where you are is going to be defined by how much money you can raise, unfortunately. We've been lucky in that we've been able to obtain a large amount of money for our company missions, but you have to decide how to use it. So production and local resources and delivery are three of the things that I define as infrastructure. When you come along to production and how you're going to meet your goals, you have to decide what kind of software packages or that you're going to use to get to those goals, how the management's going to use it, where you're going to make your hardware or software. Are you going to farm it out? Or are you going to use it all inside, or make it all inside? Or are you going to have some kind of hybrid approach? And that's got to do with what kind of infrastructure you need. We've moved 4 times in 4 years. I was thinking that the last place we have is way too big, and realizing about 8 months later, it's not big enough. We need more infrastructure. Local resources, how many people you have and where do they go? It's part of infrastructure. We're currently using a human resources package with software, including Humi and Office 5. And part of it is making sure that your people are happy in the place they're in. And how you deliver depends on your infrastructure. Some point, if you get big enough, you're going to have to go to some kind of enterprise resource planning software. We started with Google, we went to Monday, and now we're on IFS. So you got to realize, though, that enterprise system software is a multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason. It costs a lot of money to build this infrastructure. Generating sales is the easiest way to scale. You have to get your message out. Principle of knowledge opinion leaders generating from your scientific board and their contact list are important. You're going to have a need for a sales team. You have to decide how you're going to sell your product, direct versus rep-based for medical devices. And we're looking at building a supply chain and an international presence as you scale quickly. You need to do some kind of follow-on sales feedback, especially with the new FDA and CE mark rules, and some kind of consumer fulfillment programs that might be total foreign concept to someone in medicine. And you need to incentivize all those people, and that all takes money. So what do you do with that? How do you get that money? Well, you deliver value. Your value add is how you justify your price or the value of your company. And you need to have an ongoing kind of slide deck, as I mentioned, a scaling deck that looks as really a living document aimed at all your end users that's constantly revisited, so you know how you're making value for everyone in your ecosystem, yourself and your consumers. And you still need to look out for the competition, so you need to realize what they're doing as well. This is sort of a slide for Andy Smith, but I don't know if he's on board. But when you come to sell your idea, the big problem is that with new devices is that the cost and how to sell them to the hospital. This is how you're gonna make a company work, right? All new innovations need to be better to come to market. We've accepted that. You're gonna have a disruptive product come to market. But when you talk to the hospital, they also like it to be cheaper. And that's not always possible. Healthcare costs now are higher now than ever before. So how do you bring your new disruptive product into the market if it has to be cheaper? And that's a problem. And you have to be able to make that hurdle in order to demonstrate value and scale quickly. So be mindful that this is a question that's going to come at the end of all this. The final, I think, hurdle in commercialization is the popularization valley of death. So this curve represents your market. The chasm is getting from your early innovators to the majority of people. Everyone would like their device to be like a dishwasher or a clothes dryer where 95% of the people in the world want it. But you can be fooled in the early part of commercialization. Google Glass never made it in medicine a little bit, but they were fooled because they had 100% sales. They had a 3-year wait list and they were selling everything they could make. But really the only people that wanted it were these early adopters and innovators, and nobody on the right side of the curve wanted it. So when you come to your market analysis, make sure you have a plan to get to that second part. You have to have a two-pronged plan, one for those early adopters and one message for the late adopters. So products that scale successfully and cross the chasms in medicine, basically you have a clear need or market fit, and you need to have the happy 3 Ps for success. The patient, physician, pay all have to benefit in some way, so that everyone should come out on top. If you can do that, you can build and scale a company. Thanks.
Thanks. That was excellent, and lots of great book titles too. So I think I wrote a few down, so I appreciate it. So hang on, we'll get back to you for the question ones. I think we're going to move forward. So our next speaker is Dr. Georg Weiss from Columbia University in New York. He's going to be speaking about clinician champions supporting scaling up. And the physicians have huge role, I believe, in innovation. A lot of the ideas for innovation come from physicians. Physicians have roles as key opinion leaders and champions for various types of new technology. They're often the early adopters. But there's a special group of physicians who really who early on work with this new technology and do the early work with it and are the champions for it, moving it forward. And they have a very special role. And Georg is really one of the prototypes of that particular category. And I've worked with him and I've really appreciated what he brings to the table as someone who can look at a new technology, be critical about it, be enthusiastic about it, be helpful about it. And he's done that for a number of technologies over the years. And so he's been the principal investigator for a number of pivotal clinical trials, which have led to FDA approval of cutting edge technologies for interventional cardiology. He's originally from Israel. He trained at the Hebrew University Hadassah Medical School in Jerusalem. He was a cardiologist in Haifa in Israel. And he's also been at training in interventional cardiology at Lenox Hill and been part of the Cardiovascular Research Foundation in New York. Currently, he's working at New York Presbyterian Columbia University Medical Center, but he brings a really wealth of experience on how to deal with technology at the very early stage when you're starting to work with patients. And so I appreciate Georg for bringing this perspective to the day today and also just for joining us. He's an old friend of mine. So nice to see you, Georg.
Thank you, Bradley. Really a big honor for me to be part of your conference. I wish I could come in person to Toronto. One day it will happen. I need, do you give me privileges to share my screen? Because I don't,
Amen? Yeah.
it show me only whiteboard. I don't have my
Should be able to. So
PowerPoint.
if you can open your PowerPoint first and then click on the share screen tab at the bottom of the Zoom application.
Up, you were right.
And then when you do that, yep, perfect.
Okay, and I'll do full screen. I think we're good on. So
Yep, we can
thank you
see it.
again for the, thank you again for the presenting me, Bradley, and nice to see your friends. Also Brian. Thank you, Ahmed, for the technical support and the invitation. So I really want to share with you here my personal story with intravascular imaging. I'm not inventor of any imaging modality. I did not established any startup in the field of intravascular imaging. I have no patent and I have no conflict of interest. Almost an innocent bystander, but I was not completely bystander because over the years, as Bradley said, I was involved with couple of innovation and maybe progress in this field, including hands-on and an early stage of different modalities. But I want to make clear, although I will present what I have done and what I have been involved, it's not about me. I'm just like an example of how innovators and startups can use regular physicians to be of help. There are many people that have done much more than me in this field, but you can use everybody. It's not just like the big KOL that you see always on the big podiums. You can actually, I believe, use others to be on your side and your help and be very accessible for your need. Because I guess not everybody knows the field of interventional cardiology, I will talk a little about the history so you have things in the context. And I think it's a good citation that I like, that those cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So we can learn a lot from the past and what has been done in this field, just an example for other fields. So the interventional coronary intervention, or the balloon PTCA or PCI, there are many names for that. Now we call it stenting, but the early days it was just a balloon dilatation. It started 43 years ago in September 1977, when Andreas Grunzig said that why not, when we have a blockage in the artery, why not to put a balloon there, dilate it, and improve the blood flow to the heart muscle. He basically, if you see on the right lower side, I hope you see the arrow of my mouse, you can see that he designed the first balloon in his garage. You can see the equipment that he used. The most important, I believe, was the glass of wine that you see here in the background. I guess it gives him a lot of good ideas and took away some inhibition that is always good in innovation. And over the years, I'm not going to talk much about the field of interventional cardiology. There have been many devices that have been developed by many very smart, very innovative people. Some of the devices we still use, some of the devices we basically forgot. We just talk about it in part of as history. And in parallel, for one of the devices was an intravascular imaging device. And that was invention of Paul York that had many other very important contributions to the field. And he presented that in a small poster in American Heart Association in 1988. So we're talking about over 30 years ago. That was the first IVUS presentation. And just before we talk about the IVUS, telling something about interventional cardiology, when we do an angiogram, what we do, you can see here the coronary artery. You see here a catheter that, for example, comes from the groin, travels the aorta, going down to the origin of the left coronary artery. You can see here the tip of the catheter at the ostium, at the opening of the coronary artery. And we inject what we call contrast media, basically iodine. and we take picture with an X-ray machine that moves around the patient. What you see here is the injection of the iodine. I just put a still picture, but we can see it moving as it fills the coronary artery, and it's create a shadow. The iodine blocks the X-ray rays, and it creates a shadow and gives us the picture. For just an example here, you can see this is you call the left main, left anterior descending, that goes down, and you can see here another artery called circumflex. Doesn't really matter the names, but you can see here, for example, a very short focal narrowing in the artery. That's what we want to fix, because that caused either stable chest pain to the patient, or in more acute situation, even a myocardial infarction. But we inject inside the lumen, and what we see is the luminogram. We see the shadow, and in the shadow, you see what you want to see. We don't really see the blood vessel. The blood vessel is around the lumen that we inject the contrast. It has, here you see an example of histology of a normal artery that has 3 layers. But when there is a disease, then the lumen is narrowed. There is a large plaque of atherosclerosis, and it's a combination of different types of fat, cholesterol, inflammatory cells, calcium that can change over the years, and it narrows the lumen of the artery. But so we don't want just to see the lumen with the angiogram. What we want to see to understand what is behind it. And that's the reason we use intravascular imaging. We want to recognize the structure of the vessel wall and evaluate, if we do an intervention, the results. We want to understand the structure and the component of the vessel wall and the disease process. We can use it to plan our intervention, assess the acute results, and evaluation of long-term response to intervention, what is now called optimizing our interventional procedures. And one of I would say, the biggest gurus and experts in the field of intravascular imaging is my colleague Gary Mintz, and I cite here from one of the slides of one of his presentations that he gave me in order to prepare this presentation. He said that intravascular imaging has been fundamental to the evolution of PCI from the time of the past, when images were primitive and PCI technique were limited to balloon angioplasty, to the present, when images approximate in vivo histology and PCI technique are science fiction-like in their sophistication. Nevertheless, there is more to be done, especially with regard to education. I will talk about it a little more later on. So the first invention in the field of intravascular imaging was intravascular ultrasound, and the acronym is IVUS or IVUS, intravascular ultrasound. And I mentioned already that it's the invention of Paul York over 30 years ago. And just to know how it goes in the cath lab, here you can see an illustration of the cath lab. A patient lies on the cath lab table. You can see on the left side is the gantry or a C-arm, and with the image intensifier, the X-ray comes from below the patient. In the old days, it was the films. Now it's all digital, or the camera is above, and that can move in different direction, above the patient, below the patient, on the left side, on the right side. We take multiple views because, as you've seen, the coronary artery is as a shape that does not have really a name in geometry. To use intravascular imaging, the way it started with IVUS, and it's the same with all the others. We have a console, so basically it's a computer. We have a screen. It's connected with a cable to a catheter that goes inside the catheter that goes to the coronary arteries I showed you before. And at the tip of the catheter, there is some transducer, whether it can be an ultrasound, it can be a light, it can be an MRI, and different other technology that I will share with you in a moment. Talking about intravascular ultrasound, so the principle is that we have a catheter inside the vessel, inside the lumen of the vessel. And at the tip or close to the tip of the catheter, there is a transducer of ultrasound. It can rotate or it can just swing, and it produces sound waves. And as with ultrasound, it goes to the tissue, it comes back, and we have an algorithm that the physics provided us to translate the sound waves and the return of the sound waves into images. And it gives us a gray and white picture that you may see the lumen of the artery, you may see some of the vessel wall. Here it looks normal, and you see here there's some narrowing of the lumen, and you see disease or neointima, for example, in this. You can see some type of disease. It's not easy to look, and it takes some expertise and a lot of experience of hundreds of cases of really to understand and to know what you see immediately when you see those images. In the early days of stenting, we had a lot of issue that stenting is a foreign body inside the blood vessel. It caused thrombosis, and this blood clot inside the vessel was really a devastating complication that killed the patient, caused heart attacks. And with the early use of the ultrasound, I would say the pioneers of stents were able to identify that one of the reasons that we have those stent thrombosis is that it's a technical problem. There is no complete apposition of the stent struts, and you can see here the stent strut. You see those dots or parts of the stents around the artery, and you see here that it's opposed to the vessel wall, and between like 5 and 9 o'clock, you see the struts do not oppose. And one of the dimensions that make a stent popular and successful and good for patients was the recognition that we have this problem of incomplete stent apposition, and with better adjustment of the stent to the vessel wall, we reduce this significantly this rate of complication, in addition to other some measures, that pharmacological measure that we use, but so it was a combination. So here, the early use of IVUS that was relatively primitive at that times made a big difference and make a change in the way we practice interventional cardiology. Many operators, many interventional cardiologists were very reluctant to use stents until it was the recognition how to use it better based on the intravascular imaging. We learned also some other stuff like how vessels remodel, that things that we knew more theoretically and from histology, but we could only show with intravascular imaging. Unfortunately, not much has changed in almost 30 years. The intravascular imaging that we had, I showed you that the early poster was 1988, that we had in the, I would say a few years later in the late 90s, has not much changed until a couple of years ago. For a long time, very few people have used it. Many people did not understand how to use it. The catheter was also expensive, and not much has changed. It was a kind of a small group in the interventional cardiologists that used it and understood what they see. And the others were saying that that's the way. This is the last hurricane that was in the South Gulf last week. And you may say that it doesn't look much different than the intravascular imaging. I'm a little exaggerating here, but luckily things have changed. So one of the things that have changed is improvement in the resolution. The original catheters were 20 and 40 megahertz, and now we have catheters that are 60 megahertz, and you can see much better the resolution. This is an example of a normal artery, but you can see how you can delineate the margins and the structure much better. So things are going better, and there was also a push for improvement in the field of intravascular ultrasound because of the development of competing imaging technology that basically also showed industry that there is a need, and showed physicians that we can do things better and we can give you better tools. So competition, of course, pushes everybody to get better. There were some attempts over the years even to use the regular ultrasound with different algorithms to understand better the tissue or the characteristics of the atherosclerosis. You can see it gave him some color code, yellow and white and red, but that is this one of the things that never really got into the everyday clinical use. one of the big development in this field was the optical coherence tomography, or OCT. And this is a light-based imaging. So instead of creating sound waves, we're using light waves, and the principles are similar. The physics is a little different, but we have here a big limitation. Inside the blood vessel, it is very dark, right? There is no light that can basically penetrate the blood flow. The blood is full with mainly red blood cells that obstruct and distract the light wave. So the first invention of the OCT, at that time it was a startup that the name was Light Lab, the name of the device was M2. This is not very important. What they had was a balloon occlusion. So they occluded the blood vessel, they occluded the coronary artery, and injected either saline or contrast. And eventually we have learned that this contra media based on iodine, because the viscosity is higher, it has better light transmission rather than the water or saline. And they impair the blood flow in order to have the imaging of the proximal segment of this coronary artery. And that's where I was involved for the first time. And that was very problematic. It was very difficult to use this device. We were very excited about the images that I'll show you in a moment, but the patients were definitely not excited to have their artery occluded. That caused ischemia, that caused chest pain. Some patients tolerated that. Usually you had to occlude it sometimes for a minute or two. That can be relatively long time for a sick patient, and not every patient tolerated that. That was a big limitation of this first generation device. The images were very, very nice, and I'll show you in a moment, but we cannot do it if it may cause problem to the patients. And despite the good images, the FDA did not approve. There was a first in human early feasibility study, and I'm talking now with the late 2000 years, and the FDA did not approve this device and asked the company to find a solution how to image the vessel wall without occluding the blood flow. Those are the images, and so you can see, and it looks much sharper. For somebody that have never seen intravascular imaging before, and if you see for the first time the IVUS, the ultrasound, you can see here that the light-based images look much sharper. They look different. There are different characteristics and different algorithms in order to make a diagnosis of different type of disease, whether it's fibrous atherosclerosis, it's calcification, it's more lipid, and you see here, and I'm not going to now to teach you the whole field of intravascular imaging, but it's almost like an histology. You can see here in the middle, the ultrasound. It's hard to see, but and you see on the right side the histology, and you see on the left side with the OCT. And the reason for that is that the resolution is much better. The resolution of the IVUS is, the axial resolution is between 100 and 150 microns. With the OCT, it goes down to 10 microns. And this is a big difference. And sometimes you can see macrophages. Some of the macrophages goes to size of 20 microns. If there's a cluster of them, you can see them. One of the, I think, pioneers of this field of OCT was Gary Turney from MGH in Boston. And you can see here the early images. And he developed a new type of OCT in parallel to the images that I showed you, that was called an OFDI, just a different mathematical algorithm that actually improve the resolution even better. And this is the machine that he gave us, and I had really the honor and the privilege to be in the part of the very early cases that were done with this imaging modality. And that was the machine. I called it the washing machine. you can see that there was a computer on top of it, but we didn't see the images while we were acquiring. We're pushing the catheter inside, we pulled it out. We did not have to obstruct the blood flow anymore. What we did a small injection of the contrast in parallel for pulling back the imaging catheter. The pulling back of the imaging catheter was very fast. In this machine, it went up to 16 millimeter per second. And it was like really working in the black box. It was a little frustrating that we had to push it in, pull it out. We don't see in real time the images. We don't know what we are doing. But then when we looked at the images, we were very excited. And we really had superb images. And you can see here, and you can see that on the right side, you can see really good IVUS images. On the left side, you can see the images with this MGH OFDI machine. That was a big step forward in the technology. And this was almost a science project. It was an academic project. Of course, there was a patent, and this was very secure. But it was started as an academic incentive of Gary Turney, and did a marvelous job. Just to compare to the images that I showed you before, the yellow images, so you understand the yellow here is not a different imaging. The yellow here is an artificial color that the company that developed this machine even patent the yellow color, and they said that they think that the yellow on the background of black gives a better it's perceived better by the eye, better contrast, but it's not really important. It is artificial. Based on those images, that it's really, we did the first 40 cases here in Colombia. Me and one of my colleagues, we were able to publish a couple of papers and to really get involved in the academia. And this first involvement after the first frustration with occluding the artery and almost hurting patient and getting concerned about that, and still keeping very careful, we were happy that we can be involved with something that is more academic, get superb images, and does not hurt the patients. As many academic projects move on, there is a commercial version now of this OCT. This is part of, was licensed out to Terumo, a Japanese company that sits in Japan. Those devices are not available for commercial use in the US, only in Europe, in Japan. But this is an example how, for a physician being involved in the early stage, sometimes not completely knowing what we are doing, but acquiring good images and being part of how to convert those images into an academic project, into our knowledge that advanced this whole field of intravascular imaging. And over the years, there's been a large group, and the MGH group collaborated with many interventional cardiologists and imaging physicians around the world. We wrote 2 white papers really describing the need and the opportunity with intravascular imaging. The next type of intravascular imaging that I was involved also when this small startup in Israel was called Topspin, and they developed an intravascular MRI. And the idea here was not, in MRI machine, there is a magnetic field around the patient. There was no magnetic field around the patient. There was something under the mattress of the patient, but the magnet and the images were the tip of the catheter. It was the same idea. We were part of a study that did not move very well, and then Jeff Moses, that was my boss at that time, and myself, we joined. We enrolled many patients. Again, we didn't see what we are doing. This is, again, something that we like working with the black box, getting some images, getting some numbers of the level of lipid at the vessel wall at the end of the case. this was a complete black box operation. We get some, you may say, nice graphs of distribution of fields, but unfortunately, this catheter and this type of imaging never went beyond this very initial, almost theoretical field. And we were very frustrated because we didn't see any yield or any benefit to our patients. So even if you get some science out of that, if you don't get anything that your patients can benefit, you don't want to push anything inside their artery, inside their heart. A different technology that we got involved over the years was intercoronary near-infrared spectroscopy. So spectroscopy, you may know from chemistry, is a method in chemistry. You can identify different molecules, and every molecules has a different absorption of the near-infrared light and give a very specific, what we call like a fingerprint. And it can be different for even different type of cholesterol. Jim Muller from Boston, from Harvard, was really interested to identify vulnerable plaques, those atherosclerotic plaques that may pop up, may progress over time, and may even maybe have a tear and cause a myocardial infarction later on. So let's try to identify, have a preventive invasive therapy. But first we need to identify. And he was able, with very smart engineers, to introduce this infrared spectroscopy inside a catheter. And it's the same principle. It's a catheter that has a sensor of infrared spectroscopy. It emits lights. Here we don't have to clear the blood vessel. This is really unique. His engineers were very smart how basically to use the scattering of the light, the scattering from the red blood cells inside, and to use it for their algorithm. And they create what is called the chemogram. And if you look here at, like, this is a cutting open, longitudinal opening of a blood vessels. This is go from distal, that's like 0 in millimeters, to 70 proximal. And when there is a lipid, a cholesterol lipid atherosclerotic plaque, you get a yellow print on that. When it's not yellow, there's no lipid. So basically, you know how to read those images. That was verified with a very large study using coronary arteries from autopsies. They found a very good correlation between this finding of yellow on the chemogram and cholesterol plaques in the coronary arteries of human beings. And they claimed that when you have you see here a blockage that's not very tight, usually we don't treat it, but maybe associated with lipid, yes or no. Or some other areas you see here, there's this area, you don't see any yellow, there's no lipid, but here that looks almost normal, some irregularities, there is some lipid. Is it associated with a cardiovascular event in the future? That's something that we are still studying. There are some symbols for that, but that was a very exciting and new way to evaluate the vessel wall, not just the lumen. But we understood that we need actually to correlate it with the anatomy. So the next step was to combine the intravascular ultrasound with the near spectroscopy. And this is an example how we see the lumen and the vessel wall with the ultrasound, and outside we can see what area is yellow and what area is red or not yellow. I was part of a very large study of 2,000 patients that I was able to enroll many patients. I served as the PI and also enrolled over 400 patients. This is a close to 2,000 patient study that we tried to understand whether we can stent, and is it safe to put a stent where we have the yellow, because there was some concern that putting a stent when there is a friable atherosclerosis with a lot of lipid may be associated with with more complications. We did not find this correlation, and we found that there is a lot of yellow or no yellow or intermediate level of lipid. We found no change in the rate of complications, so we regard it as safe. So I'm not want to talk about this study, that's not important, but here it's an opportunity of a physician that got involved in early stages of some technologies, and when this technology was still experimental, did not get FDA approval, and when he get FDA approval, being involved in a way that's an academic project of a large study, multi-center, there were 20 centers, 2,000 patients. And for me, it was an interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the science of it, of being involved with such a study. And I hope that the company enjoyed it as well. And what the company asked for me is, when we talked about the protocol and the design, what are we interested to look? So there is things that they are interested to know about the safety, about the proving of the benefit of the technology to the device. They of course want to sell it, or they want somebody to buy the startup company and to make it to increase the market of this device. And I'm coming from the academic. I have no conflict of interest. I had no shares in the company. My interest was an academic. So how can we bring benefit to the patient in one side with using this technology and this imaging technology? And also, what can we learn about atherosclerosis, about the patients and about the disease? It's a combination. So I think those are this triangle of learning the science about the disease, learning about the clinical benefit of the patient, and of course, the side of the industry, how to continue to be successful and to sell more of this device. This was basically the first device that's combined two types of imaging, the intravascular ultrasound, as well as the near-infrared spectroscopy. And people came with this idea of the Swiss knife idea that maybe we should have different modalities in one catheter. I cannot use one catheter and a second catheter and a three catheters. It's very expensive. We don't have time to do it. And it's also may associated with complication working invasively with so many types of catheters. So we want to minimize it, we want to be safe, but we want maybe to pull the right type of imaging for the right patients, for the right type of intravascular imaging, because none of them were created equal. We need to find what is right. And people came with different ideas of combining different types of imaging, IVUS with physiology. I didn't talk about this type of physiology of measuring pressures. It's called FFR, or now it's called IFR, combining OCT, IVUS with OCT, OCT with NIR. There are many types. This is really an opportunity. Similar to what I showed you in IVUS and NIRS, now there is a startup company that, based on the same people that did the initial OCTs, did the initial near infrared, they're now they joined forces, and they're working on a combination of OCT with near infrared spectroscopy, taking the advantage of the better resolution of the OCT together with the better understanding the lipid content of the vessel wall. They're both using infrared light. And this is something that is now in development phase. I have not used any, and you can see here, it's only cadaver coronary plaque imaging.
Lior, can we we're running a little bit late.
I'm almost done.
Perfect, thanks, you.
I'm almost done. So I don't want, there's not a competition here between IVUS and OCT, because I think we are complementary. So we can learn a lot about from IVUS, that is sound waves that goes deeper. The OCT, because light penetrates much less inside the tissue. It's more superficial. So we can use both of them together in order to learn much more about the vessel wall. And I was very lucky that Brian Courtney contacted me over a year ago and said, why don't you use my new Novasite hybrid system that has a catheter that has a transducer of both ultrasound and OCT. So both IVUS and OCT in the same catheter. They have initial, showed me very impressive pictures, how it's correlate very well with histology. And it has many technical features that I really like. And I had the privilege to be the first in the US, and I don't know, one of the first 5 in North America to use this, this catheter that combined multiple components and of intravascular ultrasound, different speed the pullback, both of IVUS and OCT, and features that we can use both of them in order to use them on different scenarios. There are some scenarios that OCT may be better, some scenarios that IVUS may be better, even in the same blood vessels. And we can use one in order to enhance the other, to select exactly the distance, to minimize the amount of the contrast media that we want to check. And I'm not going to talk about it too much. I really enjoyed using that. And this was also, I think, a very good experience on both sides for me as an operator of early technology adopter, as well as the company, because this is a new system. There's many things that we found that me as an operator want it one way rather than the other. Other operators want it in a different way. Of course, we don't want always the same, but that is a way for a company to use multiple early adopters, interventional cardiologists, that they learn together how to integrate this new technology into everyday activities. And you can see, just as an example, of the co-registration of both images on one slide. I'm not going to talk much about the science of why do we use it and what's the evidence base of benefit for the patient. This is a growing evidence. And I want really to summarize here about the take-home message, what I've learned of working with different early stage technologies of imaging over the years. So just in general, that intravascular imaging has had a long journey over the last 30 years with technological improvement and novel developments peaking in the last decade. The research and development in intravascular imaging is a good example of the collaboration between end user, interventional cardiologists, and engineers and industry. And what have we learned about the collaboration partnership that may include multiple layers? To identify the needs, we can work together about identifying the needs and the clinical needs for the patients, the designing a user-friendly product, designing the relevant clinical research about safety and feasibility, and later on the scientific design of the study to prove benefit to the patients. And this is also an academic relationship, and because a good device and the development and the research of that supports also academia, and academia supports the device by creating more awareness of the device and its use. So involved and active physician interested in the field can contribute to all the above layers of collaboration. And I make this slide again, so instead of collaboration partnership, it's really saying what a collaborating physician can help with. So I'm sorry if I talk too much about myself. It's really not about me. It's me just volunteering to be an example how we can work together over the years and help on developing new devices and expanding the field, in this case of intravascular imaging. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Gior. And I think it really highlights how the physicians you engage to work in your products are not just there to use your product, but bring with them already huge wealth of experience based on previous work that they've done that can really enhance the product and direct how the investigations will go. So they're essential part of the whole process. And thank you very much for a great walk along the history of intravascular imaging. So thank you, Georg. Our next speaker is Andrew Needles, who is the site general manager in Toronto for Fujifilm Visual Sonics. Visual Sonics is a startup company that came out of Sunnybrook a number of years ago. And reading through Andrew's bio, I was impressed about how his professional life has evolved over the years. And he's really pivoted from a number of different aspects of innovation. And he started off as an electrical engineer, graduated University of Toronto in May of 2002, worked as an internship at one of the great historical companies of Canada, JDS Uniphase. Came back to Sunnybrook working as a research engineer in Department of Imaging Research, and was, I think, one of the early individuals working with Visual Sonics when it was eventually sold to Fujifilm. And from there he worked, he changed roles into a more customer-facing role and working with customers and engineers, and has continued to evolve and grow professionally, doing a global executive MBA program through the Rotman School at Toronto. And his job responsibilities have also increased over time, and he's working with R&D and customers and engineers. So I'm really interested in hear what you have to say about the topic of his presentation now, which is surviving and thriving following acquisition. So thank you very much, Andrew, for agreeing to participate today.
Yes, thanks, Bradley. Can you hear me okay? I sound all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the introduction. Yeah, it's been a long ride, but I've been involved with Visual Sonics and the team at Sunnybrook for many years. So I appreciate the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be here. All right, everyone's seeing my slides okay? Great, okay. So surviving and thriving. I'll talk a little bit about how this has all played out. We focus a lot of our attention on new inventions, innovation, especially with startup phase. We've heard about this today. How do you scale up a company? This talk is going to be slightly different. It's going to really talk about the shift from being a startup, but actually living through multiple corporate acquisitions. And, there is this reality that's, fairly well known. Many of these acquisitions often fail. And the question I often get is, well, why stay? What was the motivation to be part of this, even after the exit, which is often kind of seen as an endpoint, but there is life post-acquisition, and I'll take you through that. I'll just say a few words at the end, sort of where do we go? Obviously, front and center on everyone's minds these days is COVID-19, and where do we go from here? So I started putting this talk together. I realized it was somewhat of a loaded title, Surviving and Thriving. I suppose I'm surviving. I've been still going after 10 years after the initial acquisition. I'll take you through a little bit of that timeline. So I think I can safely say I've done the surviving bit. The thriving one is a little harder to answer. This is really the ongoing challenge, and it's highly subjective. How do you define success? How do you define growth? And what are really your goals? So I'll take you through a little bit, and I'll let you decide, all of the listeners here decide how well I'm thriving and how well Visual Sonics is thriving. And then following acquisition, what does that really mean? It's really understanding your time horizon, and I'll take you through a little bit of that, and hope to show you that it can often be a long journey, even after an exit that does result in an acquisition and then life after. So just a little bit of background. As you heard, Visual Sonics was a startup from Sunnybrook in early 2000s. It was what we do really is develop high-resolution ultrasound imaging systems for research, primarily. A lot of these are preclinical imaging, so the majority of our systems are used in small animal research all over the world in many academic and pharmaceutical settings. We do have a clinical research product as well, an ultrasound system that's used for human use in specific applications like the skin, some pediatric work, other small, very small structures that you need to see just under the skin is ideal with our technology. So the systems do use a proprietary high-resolution ultrasound technology. And we can image structures as small as 30 microns. Just a point to note, we also use some photoacoustic technology. These are near-infrared lasers that are coupled with our platform. So this is just a little bit about who we are. I won't go too much into the technology today, but I just wanted to give you the background. So I mentioned some of the research aspect of what we do. We are just over 80 employees worldwide. This includes R&D, sales, marketing, service, and other functions. As I mentioned, the company was founded in late 1999 at Sunnybrook, and you can see here 20 years. Last fall, we did celebrate our 20th anniversary, which was a big milestone. Multiple acquisitions. I will go through this in more detail, obviously. And yeah, just some other key things. We've got thousands of systems in the field. We do look at the publications that our customers are producing, and there's over 4,400 publications now, and we have been stable and profitable for many years. Our purpose and vision is really about bold innovation. We empower those that are dedicated to the advancement of human health, whether this is in a preclinical setting or a clinical setting or that entire translational pathway. That is our purpose and vision. And I wanted to point this out because I'll talk a little bit about culture, and company culture, and I really feel that's a big part of what it takes as a smaller company that gets absorbed into one of these much larger organizations. Maintaining that purpose and vision is really key to driving success and staying true to who you are. Just a snapshot here, many products over the years, just to give you a feel for the types of machines that we produce. Here's again some of those photoacoustics. We've got the laser coupled with the ultrasound. This is our most recent platform, the Vivo F2. So you can see it's come a long way, not only from a industrial design perspective, but also the technology continues to improve in terms of our ability to produce better and better images faster with better analysis tools as well. So it's a little bit about the company, just to give you a sense of who we are and what we're all about. And I'd be happy to talk more about the technology as well, if there are questions about that during the breaks or discussion. Just in terms of the timeline, so I mentioned the company was founded in 1999. By 2010, we were purchased by a company called Sonosite. Sonosite are leaders in point-of-care ultrasound. So all of ultrasound that's used at the bedside in emergency medicine and the ICU, anesthesiology, other areas where ultrasound is being brought to the patient. They really pioneered this field and created this market, which is one of the faster growing segments of the ultrasound space these days. The company is based in Bothell, Washington, and at the time they were highly interested in high frequency technology and adding that into their portfolio. And that was really the why when they came along and acquired us at the time. It was really their interest was in that technology. Things then changed in 2012. Fujifilm purchased Sonosite, and that was really the second acquisition that we went through. Obviously, Fujifilm, many people are familiar with this brand from photography. They are a massive company, just over $22 billion in revenue, significant healthcare portfolio, and sorry, that should say in 2019, not 2020, we're not done yet. Significant healthcare portfolio now. So they've really diversified and branched out into all these fields. So we've been the smaller player that was acquired once and then through a second acquisition. So that's where the Fujifilm name comes from. So really it was in 2012 when things really, I would say, truly changed for us. And then just a lot of ongoing integration activities. So everything from financial systems, IT, HR, there's all sorts of processes that get changed. And I guess my main point here is, if anyone's ever going through this, don't be surprised at how long those take. It was literally about 6 years of, I would say, a period of change and new processes. All the while we were still developing technology, but it was a little murky as to where everything was headed. And I'll come back to this point later, but finally in 2018, there was new executive leadership. So it's actually my boss at the VP level who came in, and that actually started to change our approach to how we looked at our business. Apologize here. I'm just getting a call coming in. Okay. So back to this question of why acquire? And I think this is important to think about as an acquisition target. What is really the motivation for the acquisition? There's really two main reasons, and I think the first one is probably the most common. Companies want to boost their performance. They want to hold on to a premium position. Maybe it's to cut costs by obtaining a new technology or process. The reality is that this almost never changes the company's trajectory. So in large part, the investors have already anticipated this. It's already been discounted into the performance improvements. Oftentimes, CEOs are unrealistic when making an acquisition, but how much of a boost to expect from a deal of this type. Often, things are the prices are, there's overpayment, and integration can often be problematic. And this is unfortunately the reality in many of the acquisition situations. The other, I would say, second but less familiar reason to acquire a company is really to reinvent the business model and thereby fundamentally redirect the company. So as the acquisition target, I want to make the point, this is something I didn't realize at the time, but I've come to realize it over time, is that understanding the motivations of your acquirer are really vitally important. And I would say that initially, probably being naive and coming into the acquisition, it was really, we thought, reason one, it was all about, reason two, it was all about, we have high frequency technology, we want to help Sonosite recreate their business model. And it was very aspirational, but I think the reality often slips back into reason one. And that's something to be cognizant of. And I think that's something that we're always trying to change. So why was Visual Sonics acquired? So as I mentioned, the original assumption was because of reason two. It was all about reinventing the business model. High frequency was the future for Sonosite. This is the hope, but often companies don't realize this. So over time, reality does start to set in. You start to realize that the status quo is a dominant force. And in our case, the business remains profitable, but the efforts do become focused on survival. And this is back to kind of the title, are we surviving? Are we thriving? So how do you really make that shift to thriving? And I think that's where, when I talk about the timeline, it often does take time. The key thing for me, and this is really from my experience, so this isn't, I would say, a universal truth, but just what I've experienced, it's really about internal champions. So in my opinion, the single biggest driver of success post-acquisition is having a champion leader, both at the business unit level, that would be me in this case, and also at the executive level. So we retained strong leadership post-acquisition at the business unit level. And that was something that really made us survive. And I think that was survival mode, and we kept going. But by 2018, we finally had true executive level champion had finally arrived. And that's really where we are today. And that's where I think we are starting to move more into the mode of thriving. So my advice is try to become that champion yourself. If you're, say, in my situation, find others around you that can be champions, but also try to seek out that executive sponsor. And that's easier said than done. But I think it's a goal that you should be looking for, because without that individual at the corporate level, whatever layer that may be, it's often very, very hard to break out of this survival mode and really move into thriving mode. So how to make it work? As I said, there's after an acquisition, there's those who leave, and that's fine. People, the acquisition is done, they're moving on. But then there's those who stay, and that was me. And there was several other key individuals who stayed as well. So the point is embrace the opportunity that exists. And the pros of staying really are, for me professionally, it's been about gaining some corporate experience. There's tremendous access to resources, training, stability. I mean, there's something to be said for that. There's a lot of stability being in a big company, and that's never been more apparent than what we're going through in the world today. So the other thing is using the culture that you have and maintaining it, maintain that culture, maintain that identity. And the last piece I'll talk a little bit more about, and this may have come up in some of the early discussions. I noticed a great list of literature on the business literature, and entrepreneurship is this interesting idea of being an entrepreneur, but inside a larger organization. And it's something that is it's a growing idea, and it's something that I've experienced, and I think there's great opportunity, and it comes back to the access to resources that you do have and the stability to be able to do some of these things in a stable environment without worrying about meeting payroll, or where the next round of funding is going to come from, or have you entered into the wrong market. All of these kinds of things that startups face on a daily basis. Obviously, there are cons to it. There is a lot of overhead and bureaucracy. It's just a fact of life when you are in big companies. So you just have to learn how to navigate through that and accept it. And I think that's a hard one, especially for people coming out of a startup to get their minds around. And I think I would admit it took us a while, took me a while, but again, you sort of learn to accept it, because it does, on the flip side, allow you to have some of these resources and training and stability and all the things that I mentioned. So the other issue is the overt focus, especially at the parent company, on the core business and the key customers. And I saw the note on the innovator's dilemma, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it is something that really guides me, this idea. And I think about it all the time, because being in the smaller business unit, you are constantly faced with this dilemma. How do you innovate and drive change when the overall vision of the corporate entity is often focused on just maintaining and growing their existing core customer base? The growth challenge, I put it as a con, because sometimes it just becomes growth for the sake of growth. It's always there. It never goes away. There's always expectations of growth, just sometimes for the sake of it. So I think that the challenge is really understanding, what is the motivation, where do you want to grow, and how are you going to do it? Just a few words on the innovator's dilemma. I think it may have been touched on already. Just this idea that the decision that businesses must make between catering to their current customers' needs versus adopting new innovations as technologies that are going to answer the future needs. And there's this idea of the market performance that's required, and all of a sudden companies on this blue line just maintaining the status quo and sustaining get undercut and buy new technologies that were inferior that suddenly become capable of performing at the level the market needs. So looking at it from the other side, as a small innovative company like Visual Sonics, after this acquisition by a much larger company, this dilemma is just always present. It's not something that's necessarily going to go away or easily solved. The first thing is really to accept it and find ways to innovate through entrepreneurship. So look for small projects. That's where that executive champion comes in, that can create new businesses and use that sort of ecosystem of your corporate structure to create smaller projects, smaller teams that can act like a small startup but within a big company and become entrepreneurs. Value innovation, looking for ways not only to just make your product better, but how to make it more cost effective, how to make it do things in new markets that perhaps it couldn't do before. So both simultaneously adding value, but also simplifying and really focusing your product, not trying to do everything all at once. The last bit is ambidextrous management, which I'm going to touch on the next slide. So one solution, this has been talked about in a book called Lead and Disrupt, is really trying to find one solution to the innovator's dilemma. The concept here is really about supporting the current lines of business. This is the exploit phase, they would call it, while also simultaneously pushing the boundaries of technology. So finding new market, new business models, as well as the technology itself. This is really the explore method. So this becomes the ambidextrous organization. You're having both explore and exploit at the same time. And the fortunate thing for Visual Sonics, and I think this is perhaps part of what's helped us over the years after acquisition, is that as a business unit of a corporate entity, by being this, we are inherently an innovative company. Our technology is sold to research groups, so we're constantly getting pushed by our customers based on their own creativity and curiosity to try new things and do new things. So as this small innovative part of this much bigger company, we are inherently operating in this somewhat ambidextrous mode. So just by our very existence, and I think that's actually been a key to what's helped us. But this type of arrangement's not easy. It's really only arrived at through relationship building, again, working with the corporate teams, the management teams, and building trust with the parent company. And this is something that I stress when I talk about the time horizon. This takes time, and it takes years. It literally does, and at least in my experience. And it's not something that just happens overnight. And I think as a smaller entity, if you try, and I would say we were in this mode for a while where we were sort of trying to do just our own thing, and if we just kind of go rogue and we'll keep acting like a startup, well, that doesn't work, because then you lose that trust and you lose that faith. So you have to find that happy medium of being ambidextrous. Keep doing the things that are driving your business, but also try to do those things that are new and innovative. And again, it absolutely requires that executive champion for sponsorship and support. So anytime there's some new innovative initiative that we're trying to do, I immediately start from the top and really start trying to pitch and sell those ideas. So you're almost, again, back to this idea of being an entrepreneur, you are acting as that entrepreneur internally. So you're writing a business plan, not for your investors. Your investors here are your management team, or your owners. And I think that's just, if you think about it that way, that you're constantly trying to gain that sponsorship. So surviving or thriving, as I mentioned, surviving, it's really the status quo, continuing to do what you're doing. Thriving, embracing the growth challenge. Entrepreneurship is key. And really not forgetting where you came from. So maintaining that strong culture, it's an incredibly valuable asset to thrive within a large organization. COVID-19, just a few words here. For established companies, strong culture creates the ability to adapt. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, pandemic or not. This has all just been magnified because of the pandemic. What I've seen is that our people, they care about our business, they care about each other, and it really makes a difference. So, we've made all sorts of adaptations to our business model, how we conduct our R&D, how do we conduct customer activities. Obviously, virtual has become a big part of it. So, but I really think it goes back to that culture. So always focus on the people. They're the most important asset. Keep working with them so that when things like this do happen, you're able to pivot quickly and you have the trust of the group. For startups, I'm not sure how people are coping, quite honestly, because the virtual work is a really hard way to create culture. So at Visual Sonics, we've been so fortunate that we were able to build up that base of good culture to be where we are today. So I think just try to find ways to connect and embrace who you are as a team. We will get through this, but it's just, focus on the people. And that's, I guess, my best advice. And it's been working for us so far. And we've been very fortunate to be able to continue on with business throughout all of this. I know others have not been as fortunate. So we're very, very thankful for that. In summary, there are tremendous opportunities that exist post-acquisition, something that's maybe not always thought of, but it is something that's worked for me. And I think, it's something to consider if you're ever in that situation. Do you want to leave or do you want to stay? Explore and exploit. Embrace that idea of entrepreneurship. Don't lose sight of who you are. Maintain that strong culture. Embrace the corporate direction. It's important because if you embrace that, they are the corporation's direction, but build it into your own vision and then find that executive champion to support your vision. So I will stop there. I appreciate the time and I appreciate everyone's attention. And I guess we'll do these questions now or in the chat, and I'll be hanging around for some of the breaks too. So I'd be happy to hear any thoughts from other people. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was very interesting, and this entrepreneurship one is a new term for me. So I appreciate all the new material you presented for us today. So we're going to, in the meantime, we're just going to go on to the last speaker of this session, who is Christine Lorenz, Dr. Lorenz. She's Chief Operating Officer at Coherence, which is a company out of Calgary. Christine has a PhD and MBA and is Chief Operating Officer at this company, which we've had some relationships with at Sunnybrook. She is spent 19 years at Siemens in the UK, Germany, and the USA, working with a number of products, innovations, and business leaderships related to medical imaging and image-guided surgery. Before that, she spent 12 years in academic medicine at the Faculty of Medicine in Vanderbilt and then Washington University in St. Louis. Again, working with radiology, cardiology, and biomedical engineering. Thank you very much for getting up so early today, Christine, for joining us. And we're looking forward to your talk, which is delivering on the promise of data in the real world.
Great, thank you so much. Are my slides and audio working okay?
Yep, perfect.
First check. So yeah, thank you to Graham and the rest of the organizers for the invitation to present at Medventions. This is my first time here. I've really enjoyed the talks thus far and appreciate the opportunity to share some of our experience at Cohesic. And interestingly, I think I've had an exactly inverse career trajectory from Andy Needles, going from being an entrepreneur in a gigantic company and now working to scale a small company. So I'll start off by setting the stage with what we're doing at Cohesic and how we're enhancing diagnostic cardiovascular imaging today, while also preparing to disrupt care delivery in the future. And then in the second part, I'll turn to discussing our experience of scaling the company thus far. So we're a company dedicated to improving decision-making in cardiology through a unique decision intelligence platform that integrates data from the patients themselves, clinical data from the EMR, imaging-derived quantitative measurements, and also image-based phenotyping of cardiovascular disease. This platform was born out of the intersection of needs in healthcare identified by our two co-founders, James White, a cardiologist, and Jordan Engbers, a data scientist. We use this platform to improve reporting and communication of advanced cardiovascular imaging test results. And we're also using this unique combination of data to develop risk prediction models, such as for predicting new onset AFib or heart failure admission. On a high level, our cardio DI products help transform what is typically a highly variable text-based reporting process for diagnostic imaging into a standardized, visually rich output for communicating with referring physicians. We build tools designed for the cardiovascular imaging physicians and their teams, with a goal both to streamline workflow as well as to collect high quality data in the course of clinical care for further use. So why are we doing this? We believe, as many do, that if we can harness the power of data while also delivering care, we can enhance decision-making in medicine and improve patient outcomes. But there are still large barriers to doing this in practice. So despite the progress that many groups have made in developing AI tools for decision-making using curated data, there's still some major barriers to adoption in healthcare. The first is a lack of high-quality structured data within healthcare systems that could be suitable for development of predictive models. Much of the data in today's healthcare systems is collected for the administrative and operational aspects of healthcare, and most data around patient health is not collected in standardized formats. And even if we have managed to collect useful data to develop models and have proved their worth in a study, the second barrier is getting tools back into the clinical workflow. So in order to truly impact care, we believe that the tools must be available at the point in care where decisions are made. Clinicians are already burdened with high workload, made more complex with a dizzying array of software tools. To overcome these barriers, we need to create tools that blend seamlessly with the current work environment. So to this end, we've developed a software platform we call Cardio DI, where DI stands for Decision Intelligence. We deliberately use the term decision intelligence as compared to artificial intelligence, as we believe that AI is just one possible tool, and we should use all the tools at our disposal to improve decision-making and workflow, whether they be AIs, elegant design, statistical models, or even just common sense. When we consider the diagnostic imaging workflow shown here, there are many opportunities to capture data, standardize and streamline workflow, and use data-driven tools to guide decisions along the path. But to do this in a way that will be adopted by users, it requires what we call an intelligence infrastructure that is tailored for the clinical domain and incorporates both clinical and operational knowledge. So for example, to start, we start structuring data and providing support for decisions, starting with the clinical indications. So given the reason for a referral, the physician doing protocoling for an exam can search or select from a list of standardized clinical indications, which then in turn generates protocols configured based on the preferences of that hospital. In this example, a reason for referral of suspected myocarditis combined with a suspicion of acute pericarditis generates a combined protocol for acute cardiomyopathy and pericardial disease. For reporting, we allow graphical scoring that in turn generates data and then populates the report. For example, in this case, simply labeling fibrosis patterns with the graphical tools as shown here generates findings on the left-hand side and then generates natural language statements very similar to what one would dictate. The physician has complete control over editing these statements, which are then automatically transferred to the report. And importantly, all these underlying data elements are structured and available for further use. To give another example for reporting CT angiography, our Carrot tool allows physicians to very quickly build up a patient-specific coronary tree and then indicate lesions or prior interventions such as stents or grafts. Data are automatically extracted from this graphical tool and then used to generate natural language statements as shown in the last example. So our philosophy is that when one has the right infrastructure, clinical systems can generate research grade data for every case while also improving efficiency. And when we have this infrastructure, the high quality data generated can be used to develop models to answer specific questions, such as what's my patient's risk of new onset atrial fibrillation or heart failure admission or even sudden cardiac death. And we're actively developing models to do all of these things. One simple example of this is shown here, work done by Cohesic co-founder Dr. James White and colleagues. Data collected in cardio-DI were used to identify patients with dilated cardiomyopathy with a specific septal pattern of fibrosis who are at a 9-fold higher risk of sudden cardiac death. So I'd like to share one of our favorite quotes here by Buckminster Fuller. So if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool which will lead to new ways of thinking. So now I'll turn to part 2, scaling up. So Graham asked me to speak about some of our experiences and learnings from scaling up, especially in the midst of COVID. So first of all, I'll let you know some basic facts about where we are as a company. So we're post-seed, pre-Series A. We're based in Calgary. We have revenue and existing customers across Canada with our cath products and MR products, and have commitments from new customers in the US and UK as well as in Canada. We have 9 full-time employees, a part-time contractor, and a co-founder cardiologist who spends about a quarter of his time on the company and the rest on his day job. We're supported by a great network of investors and advisors in Canada and in the US. We're running as fast as we can and juggling constantly. We know what we need to do to scale up, and we're working on executing that. In other words, it's completely straightforward as shown on this slide. So taking a step back, in the last 2 years since I joined this company, we've transitioned Cohesic into a scaling mode. But rather than trying to describe our strategy with a model such as this one that I found in some people who are trying to model startup business growth using system dynamics, I think the best way to illustrate it is just to tell the story of how we got to where we are now. And I think this echoes a lot of the comments made by some of the previous speakers. So as mentioned in the introduction, I came to Cohesic after a nearly 20-year career at Siemens, and the approaches to bringing innovations to the market and scaling business have quite some parallels there, but also quite some differences. First of all, getting adoption of technology in any industry and demonstrating traction that leads to revenue growth is a challenge that requires understanding of, first of all, how do you determine the right problems to solve and create solutions that our users really need, not just ones that sound nice. Second is then developing the right business model so that hospitals can actually purchase the solution, that it fits with the way that they purchase. The third is making sure that this solution, once you cross the first two, can actually be integrated into the user's workflow and helps them do their job instead of tortures them. We're really against torturing people with new software. And finally, being able to execute on these steps reliably and repeatedly. So in the next bit of time, I think I will just go through our journey, which is over the last couple of years, 2 years since I joined the company. So first of all, when I joined in early 2019, we had evidence that there was a good product market fit for both cardiac MR and cardiac CT, but the only direct sales activity thus far was presence at a few trade shows. We needed to really get out there and find out what we needed to do to convince people to buy our solution and to find out if it was the right solution. So Jordan Engbers, the CEO and co-founder, and I went on listening tours in the US and UK, which were our main target markets, using my contacts from my prior life. So in summer 2019, we traveled all over the place, armed with great demos, some initial sales arguments, and a first business model. We learned a lot from that tour. We learned that even if physicians loved our software and wanted it, we needed to arm them with materials they could take to their administration. We learned just how much hospital IT departments are stretched thin and don't want any more vendors to interact with unless there's a good reason. We learned that there's so many simple things we could add to our product to make people's lives even easier. So we came home, we worked on all the supporting materials to assist us in sales. We made return on investment calculators, we rewrote documentation geared for administrators, and brought back product feedback to our development team. We continued with trade shows, but also started doing demos and sales discussions virtually over Zoom. And we didn't know how valuable that was back in the fall of 2019. So we had several sites express interest in purchasing our software, but we realized that our pricing model didn't scale well all the way from small to large sites, so we reworked it. So then, armed with new pricing, we got even more interest and some sites moving ahead in their approval process. We also worked with a few sites on grant funding that would help support further development and purchase of the software. We're fortunate to have help from many sources. So we were awarded a small grant to have an entrepreneur mentor for 3 months to help us refine how to pitch to investors. We also had matching funding to have the Institute for Health Economics do an analysis for us to determine the potential value of our heart failure risk prediction model. Our investors made connections for us. We got funding from Alberta Innovates. We were selected by a US healthcare marketing firm to be one of a select group of companies to pitch to chief medical officers at large US healthcare systems. All of these things helped us to learn, refine our approach, and continue to make progress. In January 2020, we concluded that we wanted to disrupt the healthcare IT world and try to move towards a model closer to other B2B SaaS companies, where buying and installing enterprise software is much simpler and where customers can do more self-discovery. So we engaged a full-service digital marketing firm called 3 Steps Forward in California that specializes in startups and nonprofits. And we started building awareness and a pipeline of assets to help us accelerate the sales process. We opened a small round of fundraising in late February, great timing, to help us accelerate our progress and quickly raise the first third of it. In late February 2020, Jordan and I went to San Diego, and we had a great opportunity to meet individually with about a dozen CMOs of the US healthcare systems. There we learned a lot more about their challenges in trying to manage patients as populations and their struggles with getting the data they needed out of existing IT systems to accomplish their goals. So that was the last trip we made, and last time I've been on an airplane, and we all know what happened next. So then COVID. How did we survive this? So like many others, we quickly adapted to working from home and being on video calls. Being a software company allowed for a relatively smooth transition. So at first we were quite nervous, as the hospitals we had been working with on sales all let us know that they were completely underwater and they would not be able to talk, and we did not know if they were going to come back. Our current and potential new investors, many of whom are heavily involved in the oil and gas sector here in Alberta, hunkered down to take care of their portfolio companies. We made contingency plans and we tried to predict what the healthcare systems would do, and decided that the best thing we could do at that point in time was to turn our attention to further product development and to continue to build up our marketing and sales infrastructure for the future. So in May, fortunately, hospitals started to wake up again, and within a single week, we got commitments for 2 hospital systems in the US and 1 in the UK. Suddenly, everyone had adopted Zoom meetings as the norm, and any residual expectation from hospitals that we travel for face-to-face meetings was gone. Our earlier bet on virtual marketing and sales was paying off. We also completed a major upgrade at our main reference site in Calgary and continued to refine the product. Over the summer, this summer in 2020, and early fall, progress has continued as a steady pace, and our annual recurring revenue is rising, doubling from the prior year. Investors are talking again. We signed a major data sharing agreement with a partner hospital, and our risk prediction models are maturing nicely. We're shortlisted for a significant scale-up grant program from Western Economic Development. We've obtained additional sales commitments in the US and Canada, and are in partnership discussions with a major company in the cardiology space. However, the thing that keeps us up at night is how on earth are we going to fulfill all these commitments without completely burning out the whole team? How can we put enough structure in place that we can handle multiple simultaneous deployments and keep development progressing? COVID and the workload have been a challenge for us to manage. But now we're ramping up the team, hiring more developers and staff to support sales and customer development. We expect to double our team size in the next 6 months and are executing on our planned milestones leading up to Series A in about a year. So in summary, I'd like to just share a few takeaways from our transition to scaling mode so far. So one has to learn how to learn quickly, and then learn quickly every day, all the time and on all topics. It's important to experiment before locking down ways to do things. At this stage, it's too early to act like a big company, but some structure is needed. Premature optimization on any aspect of developing the business is quite dangerous. We like to say rules before tools. One has to embrace the uncertainty, but still keep a clear focus. You have to live in the gray. We have to be like water flowing through a rocky stream bed. Every time we hit an obstacle, we just find another way around it, but the destination is always in view. And it's important to take all the help that's offered. There's a lot of people want to help companies grow, and we've been able to take advantage of experts and also great outsourced services who could help us grow. And to close, I'd like to share a quote from a former colleague of mine at Siemens, who wisely said, "It's harder to pave the road than to walk upon it." Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christine. It was very interesting to hear. We heard from going from a small company, a startup, to a big one, and now back down. So it's the contrast between them is really interesting. We have now, let's see, we're 10:36. Our next session begins at 11. So we have roughly 25 minutes for some questions and a break, and also an explanation from Ahmed about the, what's it called? Galtown. So I'm gonna just, if people could send in some questions to the Q&A part, we can do that to ask someone. I'm gonna start off with one, and it's really one I direct towards Tony, Ed, and Christine, is how do you feel about market size estimations, or how to determine the size of your market, and how accurate are they, and have you had challenges actually trying to do that, and what have you done to try and, when you meet those issues of how to estimate them? So maybe Tony, we'll start with you.
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Brad?
Yeah, perfectly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think you've got a good point. I mean, people do exaggerate sometimes quite a bit in terms of their market size when you start looking back from numbers of incidence of a disease, and people then, you start with big numbers and you say, if I get a percentage, I will, make X amount in revenue. I think it's much easier when there's an existing market. And so if you're talking about an existing market where you know what the market is, for example, what's the market for GLP-1s in diabetes, and you say it's a $10 billion market, and it's going to be shared amongst 3 players. And so therefore you can say, my product relative to theirs, it's, we're competitive. We're not going to be better, and they may have a greater marketing strategy, depending who your partner is, what pharmaceutical company it is. You can then work backwards that way and really come up with reasonable numbers. If you don't have an existing market, and then you have to really narrow it down, I think, to where you think how many patients will actually take your drug, and it comes down to pricing. It comes down to which jurisdictions and will payers pay for it. So it's complicated to see how you take that down from a new indication, and also how good is your drug that people will pay for it and it'll be prescribed. So I do think it becomes complicated where you probably, in those areas, you may not even meet your expectations in terms of what numbers you draw from. So when you say I have a $5 billion market for a particular indication, usually when in reality comes out, it could be as low as $30 million in sales or 50 million. I've seen it. In fact, we have a product like that. So I think it can vary a lot. And I do think, though, if you're raising money, you have to be realistic because you're dealing with people that know those markets. And so I think the best thing is to be realistic.
Ed?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I think I'll just use our example. So about the evaluation, we were having a little bit of trouble with evaluation for our muscle trauma kit that we marketed, but there was someone in the market that withdrew from the market because they're so inaccurate. So all of a sudden we had an empty niche and we had an evaluation because we knew what their price was. Now, what number you want? I think the venture capitalists want 1 billion as a starting point. They really want to invest. There's a great story about Airbnb. When they first made their pitch in Silicon Valley, they said their estimated value was $30 million. And one of the VCs stopped them, took them outside and said, make it 3 billion and we're going to invest. If you keep saying 30 million, you're not getting any money. So 1 billion is the magic number. You might not have that with your device or your drug right away, but if you can show in follow-on, so we showed that our follow-on technology would be worth $7 billion, even though our initial is 1.2 billion. And we have no trouble having conversations with venture capitalists at those numbers. But it's harder at smaller numbers. I don't know what anyone else's experience is.
Christine, do you want to maybe about your...
Yeah, for us, it was a bit challenging at the beginning because we're kind of a hybrid between some things that are out there on the market already and also breaking some new ground. And so we started by assuming, okay, well, if we're in any of these existing markets, what's the potential share we could get and what's the size of those markets? But like Ed mentioned too, we have a base product and then a follow-on product on top that helps us go from, say, a $200 to $300 million potential to that magic number of $1 billion. And that, I think that is very important. But just like everything we're doing, that assessment of the market and all of our assumption is a living document. So every time we get new data, we revise. Every time we see the strength of one of the sectors that we play in change, we're revising all the time.
Okay. Maybe a question for all the panel, because I think it's very topical. Now that we are in this COVID era, and first of all, what do you see any redesign of the care system as a result of this, and how will that affect your approach to innovation? And the second part, which was raised by one of the registrants, that would you do anything different now now that COVID is upon us, which is, I think, somewhat related, but how does this change the equation going forward? Let's start with Tony and maybe go through the the whole panel.
Yeah, I mean, COVID has had an impact. We've had to really learn how to work separately away from each other. You know, and also with partnerships, you're constantly in discussions with partners. That is a little bit different than we used to have face-to-face meetings and really getting an understanding. So I think in terms of also what is highlighted, at least in a biotech kind of environment, is how can we use it as an opportunity? That's a question that's always here all the time is, you know, how does our drug apply to COVID, and can we use it for COVID, and what studies? And, you know, a number of different studies that we're doing is actually on COVID. So it's seeking the opportunity, it's being opportunistic and seeking the opportunity to see if there is an advantage with what you currently have and expanding it into COVID. In terms of sales, in terms of marketing drugs, it stayed pretty constant. The hardest part about COVID has been to access to doctors. They're not available as much. So there's been kind of difficult to, if you need that constant interaction to get your drug sold, it's been really hard. If it's more, you know, you go in and renew your prescription, it's been easier. But it has had a major impact. And long term, I don't know what the impact is going to be, because I do feel that people are wearing out in terms of gaining momentum. I do get a feeling they're kind of wearing out on us.
Ed?
Yeah, sure. COVID did two things for us. I mean, one of them is we're a sensor company, so we pivoted slightly on one of our branches, and we're making a COVID real-time environmental sensor. So that brought money into the company. But the hardship for the company was that we had 2 production lines running, both in California. And we started getting yield rates on our hardware side, not our software, that were unacceptable. We couldn't inspect it. So during COVID, we also moved our headquarters and expanded into a space that was 4 times larger. But part of it, we just said, okay, we're going to make clean rooms in our new space. We put up 4 clean rooms, and we brought the essential production process back to Montreal. And so it's easy enough for us to have oversight on it. Otherwise, we would be in real trouble. So we didn't have any trouble getting money, either for development or for funding during COVID. I think most people realize this is going to be over in a couple of years. We hope. I'm just saying we hope. But if they have a good company, a good product, you'll still be able to get money, I think.
Kiora? I think you're still on mute, Kiora. Yeah. Okay.
I've seen COVID affecting startups in different directions. Some had a great idea how basically their device or even pharmaceutical thing may relate to COVID and may support, and they got some funding and added that to their development portfolio. And I've seen those that tried to jump on it, but basically had nothing to offer. And were distracted from their main route of R&D to some direction that gave them no real opportunity, just more like kind of fantasies. I've seen that. And I think where it will change the most is with the telemedicine. And we had telemedicine before, but nobody really used that. And now we understand that it's feasible. We started to like it. And that way I believe it will stay, and we'll have some application beyond just like talking to the patient screen to screen, but also some technology that will be associated with that and will bring benefit to patients.
Okay, thanks. Andrew?
Sure. I've just been amazed with just the level of innovation and innovation in terms of how people are working and the ability to adapt and change. I think the question was, would we have done things differently? I'm not so sure. I mean, we've had the ability to have meetings like this or travel less or do all of these things all along. We didn't do it. This has now forced us to change how we do things. So I think Tony mentioned opportunity. I do think there's opportunity. It's changed how we are working. I don't think we'll ever go back to like a completely fully everybody in the office all the time type of model. I think there's benefits. You know, we've heard that from even our own staff, that people, when we survey our staff, people don't want to work remotely full-time, but they also want the ability to have some of that flexibility. So I've seen productivity actually increase. Projects are on time. We do miss a lot of that human touch and actually being face-to-face, but I think those kinds of things will just change how we go forward in the future. And on the technology side, we're seeing it with ultrasound products. It wasn't so long ago that, I mean, when I grew up learning about ultrasound, it was, you didn't use ultrasound for doing lung imaging. Well, everybody's, our parent company is doing all sorts of stuff with ultrasound now to screen for COVID and interventional procedures and these kinds of things. So yeah, I think with these kinds of things comes opportunity as well. So,
Christine, I'll give you the final word here before we turn it over to Ahmed.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, similarly, as for us as a company, I don't think we would change anything. I mean, by definition, I said that we're like water. We have a direction, but we shift as time goes on. And we also, I think, won't go back to full-time working in the office. We were back for a glorious month, 2 days a week in the office, but numbers started rising in Calgary, so we're back to working from home full-time. For our customers, I think things even accelerated a little bit because from the product side, the efficiency that we can bring with hospitals being short-staffed due to people being out on quarantine or even getting sick and having bigger loads of sicker cardiovascular patients, they've actually said, when can we install this faster? When can we get moving? Because it helps them cope with COVID. And we've had other inquiries for one of our other products that helped with patient intake to reduce the time that patients are actually there before procedures in the hospital by allowing them to fill out questionnaires and everything from their device in the parking lot or from home or wherever before they come in. So there have been a number of opportunities, and like everybody else said, I'm so impressed with how fast we've changed and also how fast the hospitals have changed.
Okay, well, I want to thank all the speakers of this session. It was really interesting, and for joining in and giving us the hours of your time. The presentations were fantastic.